November 1967, Oakland, California. The lights did not fail by accident, according to Daniel Inosanto, who stood no more than 8 feet from the edge of the stage. Someone at the rear of the hall moved before the breaker dropped. He remembered that detail because Bruce Lee was already in motion when the room went dark. There had been a hand on his jacket, not a grab for attention, not a student making a mistake, a full grip. Cloth tightened across the shoulder, weight behind it. Witnesses would later disagree on the exact number, but all of them agreed on one point. The man who took hold of Lee was significantly larger, close to 290 pounds, trained in grappling, and not part of the demonstration. What happened in the next few seconds was never formally recorded. No official report, no photographs, no statement from Lee himself. But 3 people in that room described the same sound after the lights cut. A body hitting wood, hard, close, and then silence. When the lights returned, the man was on the floor, not moving correctly. His right arm bent at an angle one witness refused to describe in detail. Bruce Lee stood a step away, breathing through his nose, jacket torn at the seam. He continued the demonstration. He never explained how he got free. 967, Oakland, California. By the time of the demonstration, Bruce Lee was already operating in a narrow space between recognition and resistance. He was known, but not accepted. His school on Broadway did not look like a traditional academy. There were no ornate symbols, no ceremonial hierarchy, just equipment, handwritten notes, and a growing number of students who did not fit the expectations of Chinese martial arts instruction at the time. James Lee, who co-ran the school, described the environment in practical terms. We weren't trying to preserve anything. We were trying to make it work. That distinction mattered more than either of them initially anticipated. Lee had begun openly teaching non-Chinese students, which, in certain circles, crossed an unspoken boundary. More disruptive, however, was how he taught. He questioned fixed forms. He shortened movements. He emphasized directness over tradition. To some, this looked like evolution. To others, it looked like dismissal. Word spread beyond Oakland. Not through advertisements, but through conversations, sometimes respectful, often skeptical. There had already been a private confrontation in 1964 in San Francisco, one that ended quickly but left a lasting impression on Lee. He had won, by most accounts. But the victory unsettled him. He later admitted to close associates that it took longer than he expected. That detail stayed with him, not as pride, but as a flaw to correct. By 1967, that correction was visible. His training had become more severe. Sessions extended beyond technical drills into conditioning that bordered on punishing. Forearms hardened against repeated impact, knuckles tested against resistance, legs drilled for explosive movement in confined space. He was not preparing for demonstration. He was preparing for interruption. And interruptions were becoming more likely. Public appearances, even small ones, drew mixed audiences. Students, curious observers, and occasionally men who came with a different intention. Not all announced themselves. Some watched quietly, evaluating. James Lee reportedly warned him before the Oakland event. Not everyone here is here to learn. The demonstration itself was modest. A raised wooden platform inside a crowded hall. No formal barriers, no controlled entry. People stood close enough to observe foot placement, hand positioning, breathing patterns. For Lee, this kind of setting was useful, but unstable. He preferred clarity, distance, defined roles. This offered none of that. Still, he agreed to demonstrate. Part of it was necessity. Exposure meant students. Students meant income. But another part was more personal. He wanted to show, not tell, what he believed martial arts should become. Efficiency, directness, no excess movement. But demonstration carries risk when the audience includes those who interpret it as invitation. Several attendees would later recall a subtle tension before anything happened. Not loud, not obvious, just a change in attention, fewer conversations, more fixed gazes. Daniel Inosanto, who stood on the platform with him, noticed it first in the way. People shifted their weight forward. Not casual observation, anticipation. Lee noticed it too. He did not stop the demonstration. That decision is important, because it suggests he understood the possibility of disruption and chose to continue anyway. At that moment, his reputation was no longer just about skill. It was about whether his ideas could survive contact with people who did not agree with them. And in that room on that night, agreement was not guaranteed. Something else was already forming in the edges of the crowd, waiting for the right moment to close distance. No official record ever confirmed his name. In later interviews, the descriptions shift slightly, height adjusted by an inch or two, weight estimated anywhere between 270 and just under 300 pounds. But the core image remains stable, a heavy-set man with practiced balance, thick through the neck and shoulders, not soft weight, but distributed mass. Carl Mendez, a local judo practitioner who attended that night, described him years later in a short statement. He didn't stand like a spectator. He stood like someone measuring distance. That distinction separated him from the rest of the room. He arrived early enough to choose position, close to the platform, near the right side, where the edge of the stage sat just below waist height. From there, a step forward would eliminate space completely. No need to climb. No need to announce intent. Witnesses do not recall him speaking. No challenges. No visible frustration. No attempt to draw attention. That restraint is what made him credible. Men who intend to test another fighter in public often reveal themselves through posture, eye contact, small provocations. This man did none of that. He watched, adjusted his stance occasionally, shifted his weight from heel to ball of the foot in a way that suggested readiness rather than restlessness. One attendee, later identified as Thomas Ung, who had trained in wrestling during his college years, noticed the detail that others missed. The man's hands. They stayed loose, Ung said. Not clenched. That's someone who's used to grabbing, not striking. There was also the matter of timing. He did not move when Lee demonstrated speed. He did not react when techniques were explained step by step. He waited through the early portion of the presentation, long enough to understand rhythm, spacing, and where Lee's attention shifted during explanation. That patience suggests experience. Not necessarily professional competition, but certainly exposure to live resistance. Someone who understood that the best moment to engage is not when the opponent is most alert, but when structure is slightly compromised. And Lee, during explanation, occasionally turned his body to address different sections of the audience. Small openings. Nothing obvious, but enough. The man's build alone would have posed a problem in close contact. At that weight, once a grip is secured, especially on clothing, the advantage shifts quickly. Balance becomes harder to recover. Movement becomes restricted. A grappler does not need speed if he has hold. More importantly, the platform itself worked in his favor. 12 by 16 feet, hard wood, no mat. If he managed to drag Lee off balance and down, the surface would not absorb impact. Even a controlled fall could result in injury, wrist, elbow, or shoulder. For someone who relied on precision and mobility, that risk was not minor. James Lee, watching from offstage, later told a student that what concerned him most was not the man's size, but his stillness. Big men usually show you something, he said. This one didn't. There is no evidence that the challenger knew Bruce Lee personally, no record of prior conflict, no confirmed affiliation with any school seeking to make a statement, which leaves motive uncertain. It may have been skepticism, it may have been pride, or it may have been something simpler, recognition of ability, followed by the need to test it directly. What is clear is this. When he finally moved, he did not hesitate, and by the time anyone else understood what was happening, he had already closed the distance. One step, arm extended, grip secured, the kind of contact that changes everything in less than a second. The platform measured roughly 12 by 16 feet, assembled from joined wooden panels that flexed slightly, under shifting weight. It had been built for visibility, not impact. No matting, no padding. The surface carried sound. Every step, every pivot, every abrupt transfer of weight traveled outward into the room. Overhead lights cast a direct, almost clinical brightness onto the stage, leaving the perimeter in partial shadow. From the audience, faces were visible. From the platform, the edges blurred. Depth perception beyond a few feet became unreliable. Daniel Inosanto stood to Bruce Lee's left, angled slightly toward the audience, positioned to assist if called upon. He later described the spacing precisely. I could reach him in one step, maybe two. That distance would prove too far to intervene in time. James Lee remained off stage, near the right rear corner of the hall. He had a clear line of sight, but not a clear path. People stood shoulder to shoulder along the platform edge. There was no barrier, no rope, no guard, no defined separation between demonstration and observer. The audience pressed close. Some leaned forward, elbows nearly level with the stage. A few stood within arm's reach, close enough to see finger placement during hand techniques. There were no formal rules announced because no one expected a breach. Bruce Lee was mid-demonstration, explaining principles of interception, how to disrupt an incoming movement before it completes. His stance was open, one foot slightly forward, hands relaxed at chest height. Not a defensive posture, but not careless either. At intervals, he turned his upper body to address different sections of the audience. Each turn exposed a brief angle, his back not fully presented but no longer squared to every direction. Inosanto noticed the rhythm. Speak, demonstrate, reset, shift, predictable enough for a trained observer. The man near the right side of the platform had already adjusted his position twice. Subtle steps, no sudden movement. Each adjustment reduced the distance between himself and the edge of the stage. By the time Lee began explaining a follow-up movement, the gap was minimal, less than a single stride. Witness Maria Gutierrez, standing near the front, described a change that is difficult to quantify but consistent across accounts. It felt tighter, like people were waiting for something even if they didn't know what. Then came the moment. Lee turned slightly to his left to address a question. His right side opened, not fully exposed but no longer aligned to intercept from that angle without adjustment. The challenger stepped forward, no warning. His hand came up and forward, not striking but reaching, fingers spreading just before contact. He caught the fabric of Lee's jacket high on the shoulder near the seam where leverage over the upper body is most effective. He did not pull backward. He pulled down and inward. That detail matters. A downward force collapses structure. It forces the body to respond vertically before it can respond laterally. The fabric tightened instantly across Lee's back. The sound, cloth under sudden tension, was audible to those closest. At nearly the same moment, the lights failed. Not a flicker, a full drop. The stage disappeared. In darkness, orientation breaks. The audience lost visual reference. Only those within a few feet could track movement through sound. Inosanto heard the shift first. A rapid repositioning of feet against wood, not retreat. A change of angle. Then contact. Short. Close, controlled, followed by a heavier impact that traveled through the platform. Some swore the second sound came less than 2 seconds after the lights went out. No one could confirm exactly what happened. In between, because in those seconds the conditions removed sight and left only memory to reconstruct the exchange. Darkness did not stop the movement. It stripped it down. Those closest to the platform would later describe the next seconds not as a sequence they saw, but as fragments they felt through sound and proximity. The wood carried everything. The initial grip remained. Fabric twisted, high on Bruce Lee's right shoulder, pulling downward and slightly inward. For a man approaching 290 pounds, that angle was enough to begin breaking posture, forcing the upper body to dip, compressing the spine before a follow-up hold. But the expected collapse did not come. Instead, there was a sharp shift in foot placement. 2 distinct contacts against the wood, close together, but not retreating. One witness, Thomas Ung, described it as a step that cut across the line, not away from it. Lee did not pull back. He moved into the pressure. That choice changed the geometry of the grip. By stepping diagonally toward the force, he reduced the lever the grappler had over his shoulder. At the same time, he lowered his center just enough to stabilize. Not a full drop, but a controlled adjustment that kept his balance under him. The man holding him responded immediately. The grip tightened. Weight followed. Another half-second, and the situation could have transitioned into a full body lock. It didn't. There was a second contact. Short. Contained. Not a wide swing. Not a strike thrown for distance. Something. Delivered inside the space between their bodies, Inosanto, who stood nearest, later said only this: "It wasn't big. It was exact." The effect was immediate. The downward pressure on Lee's shoulder faltered. Not released, but disrupted. Enough to create a momentary gap. Lee used it. A pivot followed. Tight. Efficient. His torso turned toward the grappler, while his lower body anchored. The motion pulled against the man's grip at an angle it wasn't set to resist. Then came the heavier sound, a body hitting the stage. Not thrown across it, no sliding, no extended travel. The impact was close, contained within a step's distance of where the contact began, the kind of fall that comes from balance being taken rather than force being projected outward. Several witnesses noted the absence of struggle after that moment. No prolonged grappling, no rolling exchange, just impact, and a brief, sharp exhale from the man on the ground. The grip on the jacket released, the fabric snapped back slightly, loose again. In the dark, Lee did not move far. That detail is consistent. Those closest heard no retreating steps, no repositioning toward safety. If anything, there was a single adjustment forward, closing space rather than creating it. Then stillness. Not complete silence. People in the audience shifted. Someone inhaled sharply. But on the platform itself, movement paused, measured, controlled. The lights returned seconds later. What they revealed did not show the exchange, but it showed its result. The man lay on his side, partially twisted, his right arm trapped beneath him at an angle that suggested it had been forced beyond its natural line during the fall. Not cleanly broken, but stressed enough that he did not immediately use it to push himself up. Bruce Lee stood less than a step away. Feet set, breathing controlled, but visible through the rise and fall of his chest. His jacket hung unevenly where the seam had stretched. He was facing the man, not looking at the audience. That orientation mattered, because it showed that even after the initial exchange ended, he did not consider the situation finished. And for a brief moment, neither did anyone else in the room. When the lights came back, the room did not recover immediately. There was a delay, half a second, perhaps more, where no one reacted. The audience had lost continuity. They saw positions, not the transition between them. A large man on the ground, Bruce Lee standing over him. Distance measured in inches, not feet. That absence of context made the moment unstable. The man on the floor was not unconscious. His chest moved sharply, breath pulled in through tension rather than rhythm. His right arm remained pinned beneath him, elbow bent inward at an angle that suggested strain through the joint. Not dislocated, but close enough that any sudden push could worsen it. He tried to roll. The attempt was uneven. His weight shifted, but the compromised arm did not support him. His shoulder dipped, and his balance failed again. The movement produced a low, involuntary sound. Pain, restrained but present. Bruce Lee stepped in, not a large step, less than a foot of distance closed, but enough to change the situation from observation to control. His lead foot angled toward the man's midsection, positioned where it could intercept a rise. His hands did not lift into a striking guard. They remained lower, but ready, aligned with the center line, close enough to respond without telegraphing intent. Witness Maria Gutierrez would later say, "He didn't look angry. That was the part that stayed with me. He looked like he was calculating." The man on the ground shifted again. This time, he managed to free part of his arm, pulling it out from under his body with visible effort. The motion was incomplete. His elbow did not fully extend, but it gave him enough leverage to begin pushing himself upward. At that distance, size still mattered. If he reached his knees and secured contact again, the exchange would reset under different conditions, closer, less predictable. The initial disruption would no longer apply. Bruce Lee knew that. He had a narrow window. Inosanto later described the tension in a single sentence. It could have gone further, very quickly. Lee's weight shifted forward, not a lunge, but a readiness to act. His right shoulder dipped slightly, aligning his body for a direct response. Everything in his posture indicated capacity to end the situation decisively, but he did not move. The man on the ground paused mid-rise, sensing the proximity. Whether he recognized the position he was in or simply felt the pressure of someone prepared to act is unclear. His movement slowed, then stopped. For a moment, both men held position. One standing, balanced, uninjured, the other grounded, partially, compromised, but not yet neutralized. This was the point of decision. There are accounts, unconfirmed but consistent, that Lee's right hand tightened briefly, then relaxed. No strike followed, no finishing motion. Instead, he maintained distance without escalating. James Lee began moving toward the platform. The crowd shifted to allow him through. That external movement broke the stillness enough to release the tension, without further contact. The man on the ground did not attempt to stand again immediately. Bruce Lee stepped back once. Only once. It was enough to signal the end. Not of the demonstration, but of the confrontation. From the audience's perspective, it appeared controlled. From those close enough to feel it, the control had been a choice, not a limitation, and it had been made under pressure, with no time to deliberate beyond instinct. Shaped by experience, that is what unsettled the witnesses later. Not what he did, but what he chose not to do when the outcome was already within reach. The demonstration resumed, but not as it had been. There was no formal acknowledgement of what had just occurred, no explanation offered to the audience. Bruce Lee adjusted his jacket once, fingers briefly checking the torn seam near the shoulder, then returned to position as if the interruption had been part of the structure. But the rhythm was different. Witnesses noticed it immediately. The movements remained precise, but the pauses between them grew slightly longer. Not hesitation, recalibration. His awareness extended beyond the demonstration now. Every shift of weight in the front row, every movement at the edge of the platform, registered. Daniel Inosanto stayed closer than before. James Lee did not return to his original position offstage. He remained within reach, just outside the platform's edge, watching not the techniques, but the crowd, the man who had initiated. The contact was helped away without announcement. Two attendees supported him under the arms. His right arm stayed close to his body, protected. He did not resist, but he did not look at Lee either as he was guided out. No one followed. No one asked questions aloud. The event concluded without further incident, but the silence afterward carried more weight than the demonstration itself. In the days that followed, accounts spread in fragments. No two versions aligned completely, but certain details repeated with consistency. The speed of the response, the proximity of the impact, the absence of escalation after control had been established. Bruce Lee did not contribute to any of those accounts. He did not describe the movement he used. He did not correct inaccuracies. He did not claim the encounter. That omission is significant. Because in private, according to those who trained with him in the months after, his focus shifted. He began placing greater emphasis on entry under pressure, how to respond when contact is already established, when distance has been removed without warning. Drills changed. Scenarios became less structured. Students were instructed to interrupt, to break rhythm, to force adaptation. One student later recalled a specific adjustment. He didn't want to start from perfect position anymore. He wanted to start from disadvantage. There was also a noticeable restraint in how he discussed control, not as an abstract principle, but as a boundary that could be crossed unintentionally if timing and judgment failed. The line between stopping an opponent and damaging them became part of the training, not verbally emphasized, but embedded in how he corrected movement. Daniel Inosanto, years later, offered a measured reflection. People think it showed how fast he was, That's not what stayed with us. It showed how close things can get before you realize what you're dealing with. No formal record preserved the incident. No photograph captured the moment of contact. What remains are consistent recollections shaped by proximity, those close enough to hear the impact, to see the angle of the arm, to feel the shift in the room when control could have become something else. Bruce Lee never returned to that specific event in public. But the influence of it appears in what followed, his insistence on realism, on unpredictability, on eliminating unnecessary movement not for efficiency alone, but for survival within confined space. Years later, one of the witnesses summarized it without embellishment. He didn't prove he could win. He proved he understood exactly when it was already over.